Oh, Pokemon Rumble U, where did you go wrong? You know, other than releasing on the Wii U. For those who don't know, this is the third Pokemon Rumble game, and the second to be download only, soon receiving the axe from Nintendo themselves. It makes you wonder, was Pokemon Rumble U even good? Well, most would say it wasn't good, but of course it goes deeper than just surface level stuff, because as we'll see, some questionable changes were made in this game, leading it to be relatively controversial among its spin-off series, and just general design decisions that are silly to say the least. So today, we'll be taking a dive into Pokemon Rumble U. Here are your timestamps. Now let's explore the game of odd decision making and a non-existent economy. The gameplay was one of, if not the most divisive aspect of Pokemon Rumble U as a whole, as it suffers of course from 4-player game syndrome, because the entire game is built around 4 players, as its gameplay of course is built of teams of 4 and you can never go down to 1, 2, or 3, and any of those team slots not filled by a player will be controlled by a CPU. Yeah, this game has a bit of what we would call Halo 5 syndrome, and that's not a game I want to compare it to in that regard. But as with the 2 games prior, you play as a toy Pokemon armed with up to 2 attacks and clear stages, this time with potentially different goals in the stage where, not always, typically ending the map with a boss fight. So with that thought, let's talk about the map objectives, since they're important within the context of each map in the game, and they ultimately determine your end goal. And of course the objective is set on a map-by-map basis, as this allows the game itself to keep itself from getting too repetitive through different objectives to actually win these maps. Through objectives like regularly winning, beating all foes against a timer, whatever this is supposed to be, defeating all foes while defending a Pokemon, or of course, walloping all foes while defending forts. Yeah, the variety is not the greatest in the world, but it does a fine job at least keeping the game from being very repetitive, something the first game could have desperately used in contrast. Well, cool. Objectives aside, the gameplay itself adds a little more extra spice to it as well, or at least most of the stuff in the game. So let's wrap up your main Pokemon's abilities by first mentioning the changes to losing, specifically through fainting. As previous games saw you lose from running out of lives, here in Rumble U though, your team technically has unlimited lives. If I'm on feints, just stand on them for a few seconds and they'll be revived, keeping it simple with a little bit of risk. The thing is, you don't actually lose a game for a Pokemon fainting a number of times, only if all actual players end up fainting. Yes, if you have any remaining AI partners, they will get knocked out if you fall, which is just silly and a little extreme. Also, the game allows you to get access to this little thing called the Touch Blast, essentially allowing you to clear the board of all enemies for a small amount of time unless they're a boss. It has its moments in terms of the gameplay of being, oh, rememberable set piece number 1 or 2, but ultimately, it makes the gameplay a little soft in a lot of cases, all of which is exclusive to the Wii U gamepad, which of course, as we all know, is just the greatest controller ever designed. Basic gameplay traits exclusive to Pokemon aside, we can transition to the map specifics, starting with items. Fun! In general, there are 12 items, each of varying degrees. Some, like the coin bag, end up being pretty useless, traps of course being there to hinder the player, or healing candies and stopwatches of course being beneficial items. Although you get to play with these tools, it begs the question of where you get to actually use them in, so the maps themselves, as you have hazards and other shenanigans on a map-by-map basis that get to help make the gameplay more volatile, including stuff like toxic and burn floors damaging Pokemon standing on them, similarly with sand floors pushing fellows around unless they're flying, fireworks to summon more allies to the field, making for some large-scale battles, barriers for actual map design, or best yet, cannons! Yes! But hey, of course, we can't forget to talk about the rockets that the wild Pokemon get to spawn in, serving as extra spawns that you can actually shut down to make your life substantially easier. And it's just so awesome! And what's also sick and silly is the game's challenge system, a list of goals to achieve in a map of varying difficulties from easy to less easy, or just straight up roadblock material. Beating every single challenge in a map will award you a set Pokemon on a map-by-map basis that is rare at the time, or just generally exclusive to the maps, offering a nice reason to go back and replay the stages that you've already played 80 million times at this point. And because there's nowhere else to really mention it, the game's Pokemon selection is a strong 649. Almost feels like there's a little too many, but of course it's every Pokemon through Black 2 and White 2, with most of their forms included. And now we reach the last piece of main gameplay, being the world map. Sadly, being a boring map that's basically on par more with Super Mario Galaxy 2. You beat areas to progress forward into others and potentially play some optional areas. How awesome. So now that we've looked at the main gameplay offering and seen that it's more generally fleshed out than the first two games, it leads us to the game's insufferable list of features that both boggle the mind and hurt my wallet. Because yeah, surprisingly, the base gameplay itself is actually generally lacking. Almost like it's a running trend at this point. Features! Easily the most what the hell part of the entire game, as it is just extremely odd into what is actually available, due to the list of features being cut from the game being pretty big features in general. For that statement alone, look, as there's no way to manually get rid of Pokemon from your collection, nor an ability to even teach them attacks. Yeah, lacking these features doesn't seem like something that you would expect, but the game sure is hampered by their absence. The inability to teach Pokemon attacks is forgivable. After all, the series already incentivized getting more Pokemon anyways until you got the best possible outcome due to never being able to just increase a Pokemon's level, while of course fishing for abilities, which isn't even an option anymore. But not being able to release your unwanted Pokemon is of course a sin, made worse by the game's Pokemon selection screen. Yeah, this is terrible. Beginning the game, it doesn't look that bad, but after a few maps, it gets worse until you eventually cap out on the amount of Pokemon you can get. And this is single-handedly the worst single menu I have ever seen in a video game ever. Pokemon are hard to see, and there's generally just no organization or search filter outside of favoring. And all of this is just made worse when you just can't get rid of the Pokemon that are serving as filler on the screen, as the only way you can get rid of Pokemon is by recruiting new ones while you're capped out, and then the lowest level mons that you have at the time will be released. Again, keeping you capped, which just is not fun by any stretch of the imagination. Another fun and totally not barren feature is the game's Pokédex. It just shows every Pokemon in the game with whether or not you've seen them, and of course, nothing else. Looking more towards the gameplay, beating the game will allow you to press both triggers on the map screen to change the game's time to night or day. Nighttime basically serves as the game's mastery difficulty, increasing the difficulty of all the stages in the game and allowing you to get stronger Pokemon. Glad to see this is here at least. Keeping on the trail of post-game content is the post-game maps. Some are unlocked just from beating the game, but more get unlocked from filling up the Pokédex by recruiting loads of new Pokemon or completing challenges, which at first unlocking these doesn't seem too bad and is actually quite fun, but it makes for a very unhealthy grind wall where you'll be repeating the same maps over and over again, hoping to get that one Pokemon or that one challenge that you need to eventually unlock more, which to call it frustrating would be an understatement. But you know what's not an understatement? The sheer lack of use cases for coins, as there's only 2 uses for coins in the entire game. The first one being to continue a map if you lose. Only usable once, mind you, but it works as a failsafe just in case you're having gameplay problems, and is slightly welcome. But for the other use is tied to the game's NFC figures. You know, one of the first use cases of the Wii U's NFC support at all. These figures have a handful of uses exclusive to this game. However, their big feature is that they provide an entire Pokemon for you to use in-game that can actually be customized at a cost, granting you freedom in the Pokemon's moveset, power level, and an ability, which was previously robbed from the players without figures, while also generally just being slashed down to only having 5 core abilities, being pretty lackluster of course. And if it sounds familiar, that's because it probably is. All of the data saves directly to the figures, meaning it's not locked to the save file used in the first place, at least allowing you to use them in multiple save files. Basically, the NFC figures will be the best Pokemon you'll ever be able to get in the game, and that's by a largely noticeable margin. There are 20 unique Pokemon figures, and 3 of them have shiny variants, and no, amiibo of the Pokemon in the game will not work in this manner, but they do work through an extra use which will allow you to summon a random Pokemon to assist the battle temporarily. The Pokemon summoned is directly tied to the NFC thing that you're using itself. So if I load this Toad amiibo, it will always have this Ho-Oh tied to it. But if I bring out any of these 7 Rob amiibos, they will all have something unique to it chosen at random, very unlikely to even have the same thing. Meanwhile, using this Litwick NFC figure itself will spawn the Litwick, of course, using its first attack. Overall, the figure assisting game is pretty neat, and in general, the NFC figures themselves are just really cool, but the game just kind of over-relies on them at times. Mostly because of the fact their power level can get so high that they can demolish the hard mode post-game maps with absolute ease. And also they make replaying the game a little bit easier. However, ignoring that, if we look at smaller stuff, like with Rumble Blast, shiny Pokemon did not return in this game. Well, natively that is, as of course there's the 3 figures, but some password Pokemon also appear Shiny. Right, password Pokemon. Once again, you type a password in through its menu to get a Pokemon. Unlike the first game though, there is no level scaling, so they are capable of completely breaking the early game very easily. Some are shiny, but they all have an ability in common, which of course is just super thrilling, because who needs variety? Oh yeah, and if you actually do want one of these password Pokemon, you can't even get rid of them once they've fallen off. Which leads us of course to our final feature, Miiverse functionality. Pressing the shoulder buttons on your Wii U gamepad will do absolutely nothing. Miiverse is dead. Why did you think it was going to do anything else other than waste your time for misclicking? Come on now. Basically, the list of the game's content just ends here. Again, this whole section is just odd. Stuff like the NFC figures, actual post-game content, and night mode are cool, but the sheer lack of abilities, teaching attacks, and way to release Pokemon, effectively grind coins, or the most annoying grind to unlock post-game content ever, just leads it to being a mixed bag of both bad and good ideas, with of course some mediocre execution made worse if you actually never invest in the NFC figures to begin with, because that's more content you'll never be able to use. Now, moving to the story, it's extremely simple. Before even starting a save file, we get a cutscene of a toy shop, and everything's great until an incident occurs, sending some of the Pokemon into the river, separating them from the toy shop. And with that, the newly lost Pokemon set off on an adventure to get back to the toy shop, while fighting others along the way to get back to the shop and finally confront the Pokemon responsible for them disappearing. Of course, defeating it in battle, and being perfectly accepting of its behavior, because of course not, guys. Second chances are awesome. And just like that, the credits roll. The end. Good job. You really did something special there, pal. Overall, it's a complete nothing story, but it gets you from point A to point B much better than it did in the first game at least. Not that it's a high bar. Now, looking towards the game's overall presentation, the environments are annoying to an extent, as all maps share this octagon shape, just varying by size, as well as the actual terrain and obstacles being different wherever you go. Listen, I'm surprised as much as you, because they really made each and every stage play uniquely despite this major setback. But hey, look at this! Terrain, magnets, cool theming, backdrops, music, and of course wind conditions. Each somehow actually managed to make the stages stand out in a surprisingly memorable way where they probably shouldn't have. As for the game's performance, slowdowns are pretty annoying. While it's not the most reoccurring part of the game, it absolutely does exist, and in some maps is a major annoyance when it happens. Now lastly is the music itself. New music, that's good, and a meaty list of returning music from the previous games. Could you really ask for more? You know, other than another section of this video? The sad reality behind Pokemon Rumble U was the fact it was never going to be the success in the eyes of anything really. Between the Wii U being a spin-off, reliance on the NFC figures, a heavy focus on 4-player play, and of course being download only, it's no shocker that the game became the worst selling Pokemon game period, even among other spin-offs. The game truly never had a chance, and since the eShop's getting its plug pulled, alongside the idea of a Switch release ever happening just being a cruel joke, it just leads to a grim shadow casting over this game, which of course isn't helped as it essentially kickstarted the death of the sub-series itself. It's just sad, because at the end of the day, the game was just fine. It was a middle-of-the-line 2-star experience, but of course better with a 4-person group, because duh, multiplayer game. But of course, there's one question left. Do I recommend you play Pokemon Rumble U? Maybe. The game itself isn't bad, or blatantly outclassed by the same thing but better, and actually manages to provide itself a unique experience not found anywhere else. But it's just kind of extremely skippable. Although I do want to state, through personal experience, I've always had a soft spot for this game. Always enjoyed it, never thought too much of it, other than how much contained enjoyment I generally have for the game. Very likely because my joy is in using external figures in games. Of course, take that with the fact it's one of 3 games I've ever actually decided to speedrun, which, let's be real, it doesn't say much, but hey, at least it's something. And at the end, while it seems like the summary I gave for the game seemed a little mean after needlessly talking about sales and performance, downright made it look like bullying at times, that's basically what the game is. It's a sad victim of fate. Reference getters, thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, or whatever, and I'll see you fellas next time.